The western sun blazed down like fire as Kahara, a large and muscular Apache woman, lay motionless on the scorching sand. She had once led countless raids, but after her final battle with the cavalry, her legs had been left paralyzed, and now that her strength was no longer whole, the tribe saw her as a burden. Her father placed a pouch of dried meat on the ground. Her two brothers stood behind him, their eyes as cold as stone. None of them looked directly into Kahara's eyes, which burned with fury and resentment. "Father," she rasped, "do not leave me here." He did not answer. He simply turned his back and said to his sons, "Let's go." Dust rose as the three figures slowly disappeared toward the horizon, leaving behind Kahara, the warrior who was once their pride. Beneath the searing heat that made the air shimmer like it was about to catch fire, she tried to drag her massive frame off the ground, but her numb legs betrayed her, sending her crashing back down. Sweat mixed with sand and stung her eyes. People from the nearby town passed by a few times. Someone muttered, "That giant Apache girl, stay away," and then they all walked on, as if helping a paralyzed person was a curse waiting to happen. When the sun had tilted westward, a hay cart came to a stop. A man in rough fabric clothing, his arms sun-darkened, stepped down. Thomas Rourke, a reclusive farmer who lived on the edge of town. Kahara gasped, "Aren't you afraid of me?" Thomas knelt down and gently lifted her shoulders, as if lifting a heavy log. "You need help. That is enough." Without another word, he began building a makeshift stretcher from the wooden planks on his cart, then pulled Kahara away from the place where even her own tribe had abandoned her. Thomas Rourke's farm sat more than a mile from town, marked only by a sagging wooden fence, a small horse stable, and a house with a sun-faded roof. By the time he pulled the stretcher into the yard, Thomas was breathing heavily from exhaustion, yet he still lifted Kahara gently, as if afraid to cause her more pain. The large Apache woman lay on a crude bed Thomas had covered with an old blanket. The air carried the scent of pine wood, sawdust, and smoke from the hearth. Kahara looked around, her dark eyes as deep as the desert night, uneasy, yet silent. "You brought me to your home?" she asked. Thomas only nodded, removing his cracked gloves. There was nowhere else. "Here. You are safer than out there." Kahara wanted to laugh, but her throat was dry. An Apache warrior who once led a squad into battle, now lying like a discarded log. Her paralyzed legs made her pride feel as if it had been shattered all over again. A while later, Thomas brought a bowl of hot porridge and placed it on the table. "Eat," he said. Kahara tried to raise her hand. Her arms solid and muscular, as thick as a man's forearm, still held strength. But it trembled. The spoon clattered to the floor. She clenched her jaw, her breath sharp and angry. "I am this big, and I cannot even feed myself. How pathetic." Her voice was low and tight, laced with bitterness. Thomas bent down, picked up the spoon, placed it back in her hand, then gently shook his head. Surviving has never been something to be ashamed of. Kahara lowered her gaze for the first time, feeling like someone was looking at her not with fear, pity, or contempt. Just simply seeing her as a person. She still could not feed herself. Thomas let out a soft breath, then turned his back to her, holding the spoon behind his shoulder so she could lean forward and eat, preserving both her pride and her strength. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Thomas replied, his voice calm, like stating a simple fact. "I am used to doing things alone. Helping one more person is not hard." Through the small window, townspeople kept glancing nervously toward the farm. A woman whispered to the person beside her, "Look at that." Thomas brought a giant Apache warrior into his home. "He's asking for trouble." Thomas heard them, but he did not bother to turn around. Night fell. Kahara lay on the bed, listening to the sound of Thomas stoking the fire, the soft rhythm of a knife on wood, the scrape of planks as he reinforced the door. Each sound carried a strange weight, like someone was quietly putting back together the pieces of her broken life. For the first time in days, Kahara slept without the fear of being left behind again. The next morning, when Kahara woke up, the scent of fresh wood and the steady rhythm of hammering echoed from outside. She turned her body, her legs heavy like slabs of stone, and struggled to push herself up enough to glance through the window. Thomas Rourke was hunched over a pile of old wheels, Thick wooden frames and rusted metal bars spread around him. She frowned. "What are you doing?" Thomas did not look up, continuing to saw through planks as if it were second nature. "Something that needs doing," he said. Kahara bit her lip. The man spoke so little, it irritated her. Yet in every strike of the hammer, she felt a kind of patience she had rarely seen, a kind of patience the battlefield never allowed. By noon, Thomas carried a large wooden board into the room. Kahara looked at it closely, and her heart tightened just a little. It was the frame of a wheelchair twice the size of a normal one, big enough to support her muscular, heavy body. "For me?" Kahara asked, her voice catching slightly. Thomas wiped the sweat from his brow, speaking as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Who else would it be for? In the days that followed, the sound of hammering and sawing filled the air. Kahara sat on the bed watching, her strong hands resting on her knees, caught in a strange space between gratitude and discomfort. On the battlefield, she had always been the strongest one. Now, a skinny farmer was building her something her own tribe had never even considered. One evening, as Thomas tightened a bolt on the wheel axle, Kahara spoke softly. "I used to have many comrades, but when my legs were gone, they left me." She looked down at her hands, large, strong fingers marked with scars. "Aren't you afraid that helping someone like me will bring you trouble?" Thomas paused, then looked at her through the warm glow of the lamp. "Of course I am, but letting you die out there, that scared me more." The day the wheelchair was finished, the desert wind swept through, carrying with it the smell of hay and blazing sun. Thomas lifted Kahara, her body heavy, but he did not complain once. He set her gently onto the chair and gave the wheel a spin. "Solid," he said. "Give it a try." Kahara placed her hands on the rims and gave a gentle push. The wheelchair rolled smoothly across the wooden floor. Her heart pounded like a war drum. "You really gave me freedom," she whispered. Thomas stood nearby, one hand resting on the doorframe, his voice quiet and deep. "You are no longer bound to one place. Wherever you want to go, go." Kahara turned to him, her eyes shimmering like the light of the setting sun. "Even if I choose to leave this place?" Thomas gave a slow, subtle nod. "If that is what you want." Kahara shook her head, her voice firm. "No, I do not want that." Ever since the day that massive wheelchair became hers, Kahara started taking part in the work around the farm. Her muscular hands gripped the hammer as if they had known its weight since childhood. Even though her motionless legs remained still beneath the blanket, Thomas said nothing. He simply let her do whatever she wanted. In the mornings, Kahara sat in her wheelchair, holding the wooden board steady while Thomas sawed. In the afternoons, she carried buckets of water with her powerful arms, every muscle defined and taut. At night, the two of them repaired the rotting door of the horse stable. They worked like people who had known each other for years without needing many words. One evening, as the sun slipped behind the red hills and a fiery orange glow lit up Kahara's sharp features, she wheeled herself out onto the porch, stopping beside Thomas, who was shaving down a long plank of wood. "You let me do all this," Kahara said, "as if I am still a warrior." Thomas did not stop his work. "I do not care what you used to be. You are working now, that is enough." Kahara let out a quiet laugh. One of the rare ones, since her legs had gone numb. The desert wind ran through her black hair, carrying the scent of dry grass and sawdust from Thomas's shirt. After a while, Kahara looked down at her hands, large, strong, scarred. Her voice dropped, unusually hesitant for an Apache warrior. "Thomas, I have never been close to a man before. I am curious, and I long to know what that feels like." Thomas froze. The piece of wood slipped gently from his hand onto the floor. He turned to her. His gaze was not filled with desire, but with deep respect. "Kahara," he said slowly, "I will never do anything to make you uncomfortable, but I will not pretend that I feel nothing." Kahara blushed. A hardened warrior like her. Yet a calm, sincere answer was enough to make her avoid his gaze. Her broad shoulders drew in slightly, as if she were shy for the very first time. Thomas continued, his voice as gentle as the night breeze. "There is nothing wrong with longing, but it must come with readiness and trust." Kahara took a deep breath. The fierce look that once defined her now softened in a way even she did not expect. I do not know if I am ready, she whispered. But I am not afraid when I am with you. That night, they sat in silence for a long time on the wooden porch. Only the sounds of insects and the wind filled the space. But the silence was not distant. It was warm, full, and touched something deep within two people who had both once been abandoned. Neither of them said another word. But somehow, the small distance between them had quietly disappeared. Thank you for being here. If this story reminded you of old days, dusty afternoons, and the sound of hooves echoing in your heart, consider subscribing to my channel, so that each day we can sit together again. And I will tell you another tale from the West. After that night full of confessions, something shifted between Thomas and Kahara. It was not tense, and it was not rushed. It was simply warmer, closer, and so strange that both of them felt it deep within. In the days that followed, Kahara helped Thomas rebuild the fence. Her muscular arms lifted heavy wooden posts like they weighed nothing. Thomas stood nearby, watching with a mix of admiration and a heart that beat faster than usual. Every evening, they shared dinner at the wooden table they had repaired together. Whatever Thomas cooked, Kahara ate even when the porridge was too thin or the meat slightly burnt. She told stories from the battlefield. Thomas shared memories of growing up without parents, working the land alone since he was 15. In those quiet stories, they found each other. One night, the desert wind drifted softly across the land, and the moon hung in the sky like a smooth-cut piece of white wood. Thomas stepped out onto the porch, where Kahara sat in her wheelchair, her eyes gazing far out toward the darkening horizon. Moonlight slid across her broad shoulders and powerful frame, casting a figure that looked both strong and achingly alone. Thomas knew if he did not speak tonight, he might never have the courage again. He stepped forward and knelt before her. Kahara startled. "Thomas, what are you doing?" Thomas clasped his hands tightly, his voice slightly trembling, but steady. "I do not have a ring. There is no preacher here. I have nothing but this land, these hands, and my promise." Kahara's eyes widened, her heart so used to war now pounding like a ceremonial drum. Thomas went on, "Kahara, I want to marry you, if you will have me as your husband. Whether your legs ever walk again, or not. No matter how heavy your past may be." Kahara slowly brought a hand to her mouth. She, a giant Apache warrior, once unshaken by bullets, now found her eyes stinging from something much more powerful. "Thomas," she whispered, "no one has ever chosen me. No one has ever looked at me like someone worthy of love." Thomas looked up, his eyes steady. "I chose you, from the very first day I met you." Kahara took a deep breath. Her strong shoulders trembled just a little. Finally, she placed her large hand on his shoulder, her voice low, but filled with warmth. "I say yes. You are everything I have wanted, for a very long time." Thomas slowly leaned in toward her, and they began to share a kiss, fierce, honest, and full of the fire they had kept hidden. That night, under the desert wind and the soft creak of old wood, two souls once abandoned found their way to each other. They did not need silver rings. All they needed was a true heart. Rumors about the giant Apache woman living with a white farmer spread faster than the desert wind. And like everything in the West, rumors always find their way back to where they belong. One afternoon, as the sky burned a deep red, Kahara was helping Thomas stack lumber when the thunder of hooves echoed from afar. They both turned. 3 riders approached the farm, Apache men, bare-chested with war paint across their skin. Kahara recognized them immediately. Her father, her 2 brothers, and the hatred on their faces was something she could never forget. Thomas stepped in front of the porch, gripping his wood axe tightly. "Kahara, go inside," he said softly, but she shook her head, her eyes as cold as mountain stone. "No. I need to face them." The 3 Apache dismounted. The elder stepped forward, his voice deep and rough. "Kahara, you ran from the tribe, and now you let a white man into your life?" The eldest brother spat on the ground. "Shame. A warrior like you, dragged around like some broken animal." The younger brother gripped his bow tightly. "You are coming back with us, right now." Thomas held the axe firmer, but Kahara raised a hand gently. "Let me," she said. She rolled her wheelchair forward, her large hands gripping the wheels, her eyes burning like hot embers. "You left me," Kahara said slowly. "Out in the desert, without a word, without a drop of water." Her father answered, "Because you could no longer walk. The tribe does not carry the useless." The words hit Kahara like arrows. She bowed her head briefly, then raised it again, her voice sharp as forged steel. "But here I survived. I built that shelf. I fixed that window. I work. I fight. I live." She raised the wood axe Thomas had given her, her muscular arms tensed, veins standing out beneath her skin. "And if anyone tries to drag me away, I will show them exactly what I am still capable of." The desert wind blew, carrying a heavy silence. Her father looked at the axe, at his daughter's massive hands, then at Thomas standing close, ready to defend her. For the first time, hesitation flickered across his face. He saw not a burden but a strength he had never created. At last, he tilted his chin toward his sons. "Let's go. She has made her choice." The 3 horses galloped off, kicking up a trail of dust behind them. Kahara breathed heavily, not from fear, but because her heart pounded like a war drum. Thomas stepped up and placed a hand on her shoulder. She looked up, her eyes still burned, but they no longer wavered. "They no longer have the right to decide my life," she said. Thomas nodded gently. "That is right. You are here because you choose to be." That evening, Kahara belonged to herself again, and to the one who had chosen her. After the day she stood up to her old family, it felt as if a heavy stone had finally been lifted off Kahara's chest. The next morning, she woke earlier than usual and wheeled herself out into the yard just as the sun was breaking over the desert in a thin line of light. Thomas was checking the new fence. He turned when he heard the sound of wheels on dirt. "You are up early," he said. Kahara shrugged. "Working helps clear the mind." She lifted a wooden post with one hand, muscles standing out beneath her darkened skin. Thomas watched, unable to hide his admiration. Even with paralyzed legs, the strength in her upper body was so powerful that it often made him stop just to look at her. In the midday heat, they worked side by side, watering the cornfield, fixing the roof of the stable, sweeping away fallen wood scraps. Kahara threw herself into the work with such energy that Thomas finally reached out and touched her shoulder gently. "Kahara, take a break. You do not have to prove anything." She looked up, sweat trailing down her temple, her eyes softer than usual. "I am not doing this to prove anything. I am doing it because I belong here." Those words made Thomas pause for a long moment, as if the desert wind had just blown straight into his heart. That afternoon, they ate together under the porch. Kahara looked out over the land, the freshly repaired stable, the new fence, the door with its new coat of paint. Everything bore her mark. She spoke without thinking. "I used to believe I only had value when I held a spear, when I could ride a horse. When my legs gave out, I thought I had lost everything." Thomas rested his arm on the table, his voice as steady as ever. "You still have so much more. Strength, will, and a heart." Kahara let out a quiet laugh. "A heart? A warrior like me? With a heart?" Thomas looked straight at her, eyes unblinking. "You have more heart than anyone I have ever met." As the evening settled in, red sunlight mingling with golden dust, Kahara leaned her head against the doorframe. Her voice was low, but softer than he had ever heard it. "Thomas, when I am with you, I do not feel like someone who was left behind. I feel alive." Thomas stepped closer and placed a hand on her shoulder gently, as if touching something precious. "You did not fall into my life," he said. "You walked into it with your own strength." Kahara closed her eyes, letting those words sink deep into her heart. This place, the wooden porch, the cornfield, the smell of sawdust, the sound of sawing wood each morning, was no longer just a farm. It was home. And for the first time since the war, Kahara knew she was worthy of love, of staying, and of living a life no one else could define for her. There were no church bells on the wedding day of Thomas and Kahara, no preacher. Just a quiet desert morning, the wind brushing through golden grass, and 2 souls once abandoned, now standing side by side on a wooden porch. Thomas had woken up early. He brought out a small box made of pine wood, its surface still marked by carving tools. When he opened it, Kahara saw a rough, wide silver ring clearly forged to fit her strong, powerful fingers. Her throat tightened. "Thomas, you made this for me?" He nodded gently. "I have wanted to give it to you for a long time. I was just waiting for the right day." Thomas took Kahara's hand, a hand large, scarred, and full of strength from countless battles. He slid the ring on. It fit perfectly, as if it was made for her and no one else. "Kahara," Thomas said, his voice low but steady, "you were not abandoned in this life. You were chosen, and you have earned your place here." Kahara bit her lip. On the battlefield, all those years, she had not shed a single tear. But now, standing in front of this man, the tears came hot and fast. "All my life," she said, "I only knew how to fight, and how it felt to be left behind. But you were never afraid of me. You never turned away. You saw me, Thomas. You saw who I really am." Thomas smiled and gently pressed his forehead to her hand, like a quiet vow spoken without words. "And I will keep seeing you that way, for the rest of my life." The desert wind swept across the porch, lifting strands of Kahara's long black hair. She reached up, touched the silver ring, and for the first time, her broad chest felt light, free from the weight of the past. She spoke softly, but with unwavering certainty. "Two people who were once cast aside have now built a home." After that morning, the little farm began to change. Kahara built a new shed, repaired the stable, and carved every plank of wood with her powerful hands. Thomas expanded the cornfield, planted more hay, taught her how to read the soil, read the sky, and track the seasons. And every evening, when the sun melted behind the red hills, they sat side by side on the wooden porch, watching the last light fade. No war, no abandonment, just warmth, passing quietly from one shoulder to the other. In the harshest, driest land of the West, a family was built not with riches, not with grand words, but with resilience, kindness, and a love that no one believed they deserved, except for themselves. Dear listener, some people never speak grand words, never ask to be noticed. They simply kneel down and lift someone up, just as Thomas did with Kahara. Kindness is not charity. It is the most natural instinct of hearts that can see pain in the eyes of another. In a land full of gunsmoke and selfishness, kindness is rare, like water in the desert. But sometimes, just one person like that is enough to change another person's life forever. Thank you for being here with me, dear audience of Wild West storytelling. Wherever you are listening to this from, I hope peace and happiness always follow you. I love you all. Tell me where you are listening from. Type the number 8 if you enjoyed this story, and do not forget to subscribe to the channel to support me. Thank you, dear friends of Wild West storytelling. The wind howled and lashed against the wooden walls, as if trying to rip the cabin apart. Samuel Drake sat by the fire. Then, suddenly a faint knock echoed through the howling wind. Samuel frowned. In this kind of weather, even wild animals would not dare to roam. He sprang to his feet, walked to the door, opened it, and his heart nearly stopped. On the snow-covered ground knelt two large, muscular Apache women, huddled tightly together. Their lips were purple, their hair frozen to their faces, and their breaths were shallow, like they only had a few left. They were nearly naked beneath scraps of torn cloth. The one in front, Nayeli, lifted her head, her dark golden eyes flickering. She reached out, trying to cling to the doorway. Her voice was hoarse, almost broken. "I need the warmth of a man like you." Everyone turned us away. Samuel froze. His mind urged him to shut the door to avoid trouble, to stay safe. But his heart had seen too many people die in the cold. He bent down and picked up Sahale, the girl who was barely hanging on. Then he wrapped his arms around Nayeli. Their bodies were heavy and cold as ice. As he pulled the door closed, the wind wailed like the cry of darkness being left behind. Samuel said, "I will not leave anyone outside during a storm. Come in." The two women collapsed beside the fireplace, their breathing faint, and Samuel, as he sat down next to them, had no idea that this stormy night would open a whole new path for three souls abandoned by the world. The fireplace glowed red all night, Its warmth spread through the damp, chilly wooden walls. But Samuel could not take his eyes off the two large bodies curled up together on the dry deer hide. Now and then, Nayeli trembled gently, trying to keep Sahale, the one more severely injured, from getting colder. The strong muscles along her shoulders and back shivered violently from the fever. Sahale, on the other hand, breathed in short, shallow bursts, as if a single strong gust of wind might carry her soul away. Samuel placed his hand on their foreheads to check. Ice cold. He slowly pulled another wool blanket over both of them. Inside the small cabin, only the crackle of firewood and the whistling wind seeping through wooden cracks could be heard. The red glow lit up 3 people. 2 Apache women, statuesque like ancient warrior goddesses, and an old rancher whose eyes had seen too much sorrow. On the first morning, Nayeli opened her eyes. She looked around, alert, like a wounded animal. Nayeli said, "Sahale." "Where is she?" Samuel replied. "Right next to you. Still breathing. Slow, but alive." She reached out and gently touched Sahale's face. Her eyes turned red. Nayeli said, "If she dies, I have no one left." Samuel said nothing. He understood that feeling more than anyone. Days passed. Snow still blanketed the windows. Samuel ground herbs, boiled water, changed bandages. The 2 women were still far too weak to move. He made soup, coaxing them to drink it, spoon by spoon. Though strong, Nayeli often glanced at him with guarded eyes. One evening, as Samuel set the pot of porridge near the fire, Nayeli asked quietly, "Why are you helping us? Every man stays away from my tribe." Samuel did not turn around. He simply pushed the logs deeper into the flames. "I once left someone behind in a storm, and I have regretted it for many years." He paused. "I will not do it a second time." The words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. The next day, Sahale fully woke up, her deep black eyes blinking slowly like a lost child. "Sahale." "Where are we?" Samuel replied. "My cabin. The storm has not passed yet. You should stay until you are strong again." She looked at him for a long time, then whispered, "Thank you, even though I do not know why you would risk helping us." In that small cabin, 3 wounded souls lived together through the longest winter of their lives. No one asked about the past. They simply shared the fire, the food, and the quiet presence of others who had once been cast aside by the world. Samuel did not know what was changing, but he could feel it clearly. In the warmth of the fire, something was slowly beginning to melt. The storm had not let up. Snow piled thick on the cabin's roof. Inside the wooden room, the warmth from the fire kept the 3 of them from shivering as they once had, but the silence was slowly becoming heavy. Sahale was now able to sit up, though a long gash still ran down her back. Nayeli was stronger, but her face always seemed to be holding something back. One gray afternoon, as Samuel was feeding more wood into the fire, Nayeli suddenly spoke. "Do you want to know why we were left outside to die?" Samuel did not turn around, but his eyes shifted toward them through the dim reflection in the mirror. "Only if you want to tell me." Sahale gently touched her sister's shoulder, as if asking permission. Then it was she, the calmer one, who began. "We are not criminals, but we were cast out from the tribe." Samuel. "Why?" A long silence followed. The 2 sisters looked at each other, an exchange full of years of pain. Sahale. "Because we could not give the chief a child. He is old, his strength is gone." But he blamed the women instead. Nayeli's voice trembled, her hands clenched into fists. The muscles on her strong arms flexed, like trying to hold back her rage. "They said we had no worth. That we did not carry the tribe's blood. That we were not worthy to stay." Sahale lowered her head, her voice barely a whisper. "They said we were a bad omen, not allowed to exist in winter." Samuel tightened his grip on the piece of firewood. He knew too well the feeling of being pushed away from a place you once belonged. "Samuel, it was not your fault." "Nayeli." "But the whole tribe believed it was. They beat us and drove us out. We ran for 2 days, with nothing but our lives." In that moment, Samuel saw it more clearly than ever. These 2 Apache women, despite their powerful muscles, Despite their statuesque warrior-like bodies carried in their eyes a pain deeper than any winter snow could match. Samuel set the firewood down and stepped closer. Here, no one sees you as a curse. You are just people trying to survive. Nayeli looked at him for a long time. Her dark golden eyes, once filled with suspicion, now held something else, a small but real flicker of trust. Sahale said, "Are you not afraid of us, Samuel? If you wanted to hurt me, you would have done it the moment you woke up." The two sisters looked at each other, then let out a soft laugh, the first laugh in the cabin since the day they arrived. Outside, the wind still howled, but inside the small room, a truth had just been spoken, and it was like a piece of ice had melted. 3 days later, the snowstorm began to ease. The wind no longer howled, it was now just a soft chill, like winter breathing a quiet sigh. Through the foggy window, Samuel saw a faint glimmer of sunlight behind the thick curtain of clouds. Nayeli stepped up beside him, a thick blanket draped around her shoulders. "The snow is starting to melt," Samuel replied. "Yes. This winter came faster than any I can remember." She tilted her head to look at him, her eyes calm but holding something deeper, something hard to name. Over the past few days, the cabin had become more than just a place to wait out a storm. It had become a shelter for 3 hearts, slowly learning to heal. Sahale laughed more. Nayeli let down her guard, and Samuel felt this house a little less empty. That morning, while the 2 women still slept, Samuel closed the cabin door, threw on his leather coat, and stepped outside. The snow still reached his knees, but he walked far out behind the pine trees, to a place where the remains of an old foundation still lay. He stood there for hours in silence, then began to rebuild, plank by rotting plank. The steady sound of a hammer echoed across the white landscape, like a quiet declaration he could not yet say out loud. By afternoon, when the snow had stopped falling, Nayeli and Sahale found him standing in the middle of a rough wooden frame. Sahale said, "Samuel, what are you doing?" He set down the hammer and wiped his forehead. "Samuel, building an extra room." Nayeli stepped closer, her hand brushing the new wood, the breeze lifting strands of her hair. "Nayeli. For who?" Samuel looked at them, 2 strong, towering women. Yet in their eyes was a kind of vulnerability he had never seen in anyone else. "For the 2 of you. Or, for the 3 of us, if you want to stay." They stood still. Melting snow dripped from the pine branches above, falling on their shoulders like quiet tears. "Sahale. Are you not afraid? Apache and white people. They are not meant to live together." Samuel shook his head. "I do not care what the world thinks. I only know this place is not just a shelter." Nayeli looked deep into his eyes, her voice low and raspy. "Then how long do you want us to stay with you, Samuel?" "Until the snow falls again. Until spring comes. Until you decide to leave. Or never do." Sahale placed her hand on the fresh wood, smiling a gentle smile that looked almost out of place on her strong face. "Samuel, we are not going anywhere." Nayeli stepped closer, standing beside him, her breath warm in the winter air. Nayeli said, "If you give us a place to begin again, we will call this place home." And right at that moment, the last patch of snow slid from the cabin roof, as if winter had finally given in, making way for something new. I am deeply grateful for your presence here. If this story brought back memories of dusty afternoons, of hoofbeats echoing in your heart, subscribe to my channel, so that each day we can sit together once more, and I will tell you another story from the West. The snow had stopped falling, but the chill still lingered in every crack of the wooden walls. Samuel's cabin had become the only place in the mountains that still held a rare trace of warmth. After building the extra room, something between the 3 of them began to shift, in a way that made Samuel pause in his work more than once. Breathing a little slower than usual, in the late afternoons, Sahale would sit on the porch, her large hands carefully sharpening Samuel's hunting knife. The pale sunlight touched her usually stoic face, and somehow, she looked gentler than ever. Nayeli, on the other hand, split firewood. Every swing of her axe was powerful and precise, the muscles in her shoulders moving clearly beneath the fur wrap she wore. There were moments when Samuel looked over at the two sisters and felt for the first time that this cabin truly had life inside it. On a windless afternoon, the three of them sat together on the porch. The sun peeked out through the gray sky, its light faint but warm. Sahale smiled softly as she looked upward. It has been a long time since the sun looked this beautiful. Samuel lifted his gaze in the same direction and replied slowly, "With people here, everything looks brighter. A die. A die. A die." Nayeli turned to him instantly, her expression half serious, half playful. "You mean, the cabin feels less lonely?" The question struck something deep inside Samuel. He did not answer. He simply exhaled. Sahale set the knife down and scooted a little closer, her voice soft, as if afraid to wake the sleeping winter wind. "We see it. Samuel, the sadness in your eyes, it is the same sadness we carry." Samuel lowered his head. Images of his wife and child passed through his mind like pale ghosts behind him. Nayeli moved in closer as well, the warmth of her large body pulling the air tighter around them. She placed her strong hand over the back of his, her voice low and honest. "You opened the door for us that night. No one ever did that. No one ever looked at us as people." Sahale leaned her head gently on Samuel's shoulder, so gently it made his heart tighten. "If it had not been for you, we would have died in the snow." Samuel looked at them both. Their eyes were as strong as the mountains, yet soft as melting ice. He spoke quietly, his voice deep and real. "I opened the door because I know what it feels like to be left outside in the cold night. No one deserves that." Nayeli gave his hand a gentle squeeze. Between the three of them, something was beginning to grow slowly, quietly, and there was no going back. Winter slowly began to retreat. Melted snow trickled down the cabin roof, each drop falling with a quiet rhythm, like the first breaths of life after a long frozen silence. The pine trees surrounding Samuel's home looked greener now, their branches no longer heavy with snow. Inside the cabin, the air had changed too in a way that words could not quite capture. It was no longer just three people living together to survive the storm. It felt more like a home. That morning, Samuel rose early. As he tended to the fire, he heard slow footsteps behind him. Sahale stood there, her hand resting gently on her stomach, her gaze distant. But in her eyes, there was something new, something like astonishment, tangled with hope. She touched his shoulder lightly, her voice soft as morning mist. "Samuel, something feels different inside me." From behind, Nayeli stepped forward, her expression just as strange. She placed a hand over her own belly, as if trying to make sure the feeling was not just her imagination. "Samuel," her voice was low and trembling, "something in us is not the same anymore. Xi, manly, in 5. Samuel looked at them. Two tall, powerful women once cast out by their tribe as bad omens now stood before him with eyes full of confusion, like children facing something miraculous for the first time. He stepped closer and gently placed his hand over Sahale's. There it was, a warmth. Subtle, small, but real. Samuel's breath caught in his throat. It might be. He did not finish the sentence. But all three of them understood. Nayeli turned to him, her voice husky. "If this is real, then it is not the miracle of spring. It is yours." Samuel gently squeezed her hand, his eyes deep and calm. "If there is life growing, then it is ours. It belongs to this family." Sahale laughed through her tears. A gentle, aching kind of laugh. "I never thought I could belong anywhere, and now there might be an entire life waiting for me." Nayeli stepped in closer, her broad shoulders trembling with emotion. "We were cast out for not being able to bear children, but here we are being given a new beginning." Samuel looked at them both, then to the small cabin bathed in soft golden morning light, and in that moment he knew. He was no longer a man trapped in old grief. He had two companions, and maybe soon there would be small breaths joining them. Samuel placed his hands on both of their bellies and said in a voice steady and strong, like the pine tree outside the cabin, "This is our family. No one can take that away. No one can cast us out ever again." Outside, The early spring sunlight poured through the cabin windows, like a blessing from the earth and sky. Just as spring touched the edge of the mountains, the past of the two women found its way to them. That day, the wind was still. The pine forest stood silent, as if holding its breath. Samuel was checking the fence when he felt a sharp chill crawl down his spine, a gut instinct, the kind only a former soldier who had once stared death in the face could understand. On the damp earth, unfamiliar footprints had appeared. 3 at first, then 5, then more. These were not animal tracks. Someone was watching. Samuel returned to the cabin, his voice low and firm. Someone is coming. Not from around here. Sahale tightened her grip on her sleeve, her deep black eyes darkening. Nayeli glanced out the window, her gaze sharp as an axe blade. They've come for us. The three of them stood side by side, saying nothing more. Within just a few breaths, shadows began to appear at the edge of the forest, familiar figures with long braids, tall spears, and faces painted in tribal patterns. Leading them was an older man, tall and broad, his face cold as carved stone. It was Chief Koa, the one who had cast out Nayeli and Sahale. Nayeli stepped out onto the porch, standing tall like the pine at the top of the hill. Her voice rang out strong, unwavering. "We do not belong to you anymore. We are not coming back." Chief Koa looked at her, then at Sahale, his eyes filled with pride, wounded pride, and the arrogance of a man used to obedience. "When I cast you out, I gave you the honor of dying with dignity in winter." He spoke each word like a blade, driven straight into the heart. "But you chose to live with a white man." Samuel stepped forward, standing between the two women, his voice calm and steady, but without a hint of fear. "They chose to live, and I will not let anyone take them." A warrior behind the chief stepped forward, his eyes burning with warning. But Sahale answered, her voice calm and sharp as ice. "If you came to take us back, you are too late. The day you drove us out, we stopped being yours." Nayeli added, her voice hard with resolve, "We have a new family now. And this time, no one will take it from us." Chief Koa looked at the three of them standing together. He looked into the eyes of the two women, eyes that once bowed to him, now solid as mountain stone. His grip tightened on his spear. His breath trembled, just for a moment. Samuel stood firm. "Leave," he said, his voice low but powerful, like thunder. "No one here belongs to you." The forest went still. The Apache warriors looked to their chief, waiting for his command. But instead of stepping forward, Koa turned away. He said nothing. They had come with threats, but they left in silence. As their figures disappeared into the pine woods, Sahale collapsed to her knees, exhaling a heavy breath. Nayeli placed a hand on her sister's shoulder, and Samuel stood shielding them both, like even if the sky fell, he would hold it up. A family had just passed its first great trial, and no one, not an old tribe, nor any storm, could ever break them apart again. As the shadows of Chief Koa and the old warriors disappeared into the pine forest, the entire world seemed to exhale. A spring breeze swept through, carrying the scent of warm pine and freshly thawed earth. The last bit of winter's snow slipped from the cabin roof, landing on the damp ground with a soft thud like a quiet knock marking the end of something. Samuel stood still on the porch, his calloused hands still trembling slightly from the tension. But when he turned around, he saw Nayeli helping Sahale to her feet, the two women leaning on each other like great trees that had survived the storm. Their eyes met his, warm, trusting, and full of choice. Sahale spoke softly, her voice still tight with emotion. "You stood in front of us, even when it could have cost you your life." Nayeli stepped closer, her broad shoulders bathed in the light of the setting sun. "No one has ever done that for us. No one." Samuel said nothing. He simply stepped forward and placed a hand on both their backs, a simple gesture, yet full of meaning. "We made it through," he said, slow and steady. "And from this day on, no one will ever cast you out again." The evening passed in a strange, gentle stillness, not heavy, but warm, like the earth itself taking a breath. They shared a simple dinner, stewed venison, cornbread, and herbal tea. Every glance exchanged at that table felt lighter, brighter, as if spring was not only blooming outside but inside each of them. As the fire inside the cabin crackled higher, Sahali sat close to Samuel, placing her hand softly over his. Family is not where you are born. It is where no one leaves you behind. Nayeli smiled a strong, hopeful smile. And we found it, Samuel. Right here. Outside, the sky turned a shade of amber, streaked with thin, silky clouds. The small wooden cabin sat nestled deep in the valley, and the light inside it was warmer than the spring sun. Samuel wrapped his arms around the two strong women who had saved his life in ways he never expected. We will raise our children here, he said gently, but firmly. Like a vow, they will grow up afraid of no one. Running from nothing, Nayeli and Sahale leaned their heads on his shoulders like two taut strings that had finally been allowed to loosen. The spring wind danced across the meadow, stirring the tender buds just beginning to bloom. And inside the cabin, the three souls the world once cast aside sat together as a family chosen by the earth and sky. No ceremony, no grand promises, just a simple truth. They had found each other, and they had chosen one another, in the spring of a brand new life. My friends, there are wounds we believe will follow us for the rest of our lives, old memories, bitter winters that linger in the heart. But then love appears not loud, not dazzling, just quietly, like a small flame in the cold night. It does not erase the past, but it gives us the courage to face it without trembling. In that it agrees. Love is not magic, but it knows how to mend what has been broken. It puts the pieces back together to make someone new, warmer, stronger, and brave enough to believe that happiness is still waiting just ahead. It has been a true honor to share this story with you. I only hope that wherever you are, peace and happiness find you. I love you, my dear listeners of Wild West Storytelling. Tell me how you felt about this story in the comments below. Type the number 8 if it touched your heart. And do not forget to subscribe so you never miss another tale from the Wild West. The wind swept across the sand, blowing the dust away and revealing more clearly the two figures collapsed on the ground. And Reuben's heart sank. A towering Apache woman, nearly 7 feet tall, with bulging muscles, lay on her side. Half her body was covered in swollen, purple bruises. Her left shoulder had a deep tear, as if someone had yanked and tormented it violently. Though she looked powerful, her entire body was now trembling faintly, her breathing heavy and ragged, like the final growl of a beast cornered with no way out. Beside her was a small girl, curled up like a dried leaf. Her lips were cracked and split, and her eyes fluttered, barely able to open. They were not just exhausted anymore, they were truly dying. Reuben stood frozen. Helping an Apache was asking for trouble. If the patrol found out, he could be hanged for harboring savages. But when he looked at the large body shaking in pain and the child gasping for air, he knew. If he did not help, both of them would surely die. Without a moment's hesitation, Reuben dropped to his knees. He lifted the little girl first. She was light as air. She let out a faint moan, so weak it tightened something deep in Reuben's chest. Then he turned to the mother. Her body was as heavy as a fallen tree, but Reuben gritted his teeth, slipped his arms under her shoulders, and hoisted her onto the wagon. Every wound on her body seemed to tell a cruel story he dared not imagine. "Hold on, I am taking you both home," he whispered. And in that desert, blazing hot like a furnace, Reuben had no idea he was about to step into the greatest turning point of his life. Reuben almost had to shoulder the door open. The 2 water barrels, a dying child, and Nakana's massive frame weighed down the small wagon so heavily that every step had become a burden. He laid Tala on the bed first. The little girl burned like a coal. Her lips were turning blue. Just 1 more hour, and she might not have made it. Reuben dashed back and forth like a man gone mad. Boiling water, preparing cold towels, grinding healing herbs, scooping water into a tin can, and letting tiny drops trickle between the girl's lips. Tala's breathing came in short, broken gasps. At times, her chest would stop for a beat, and Reuben's blood would run cold. He had once watched his wife die from fever, and every time Tala's small body convulsed, it felt like a fresh wound tearing open in his heart. In the corner of the room, Nakana lay stretched out on the floor, her breath heavy like rolling stones. Despite her enormous, powerful body, The torn bruises covering her made it nearly impossible for her to move. But those deep black eyes never left Reuben. She said nothing. She only watched, and endured the pain in silence. On the first night, Tala mumbled in a feverish haze, calling out for her mother. On the second night, the convulsions began, and her breath came in sharper, more fragile fragments. Reuben did not sleep a single second. Every time Tala trembled violently, he held her close, keeping that tiny body from hurting itself. On the third night, desert winds howled through the cracks in the door. The fire in the stove flickered, threatening to die. Finally, Tala's breathing began to steady. Her fever dropped, slowly. When Reuben laid his hand on her forehead and felt the warmth recede, he let out a long, trembling sigh. It was then that Nakaana pushed herself up. Her body shook with pain, but she forced herself to stand. Her shadow filled nearly half the room. Reuben looked up and saw those eyes deep, warm, and holding something impossible to name locked on him. She walked over and knelt beside him, her large, scarred hand gently touching his cheek. The weight of it was heavier than most, but the touch held a softness Reuben never thought possible from such a warrior. Her voice was rough, weak, but steady. "I will give myself to you. Will you accept me?" Reuben froze. He had never heard words so blunt, so brutally honest. Nakana continued, forcing her words through the pain. "I want you to be the father of my child. She needs a father. I cannot protect her alone anymore." Reuben took a step back, his face tense. "You're saying this out of desperation. I don't want to take advantage." Nakana shook her head softly. Her breath wavered with pain, but her gaze was solid as stone. "This is not begging. This is choosing, and I choose you. Because you fought death for 3 nights straight for my daughter." Reuben clenched his fists, torn between compassion, fear, and a responsibility that felt heavier than the desert sky. From the bed, Tala gave a soft cough, then instinctively reached out and wrapped her little hand around Reuben's. In that moment, every trace of hesitation inside him seemed to melt into the sand. But all Reuben could whisper was, "Let's wait until Tala is fully well. Then we will talk." And with that answer, the fate of the 3 of them began to shift in a way that would never turn back. On the first morning after Tala's fever broke, sunlight streamed through the old wooden window, filling the room with an oddly comforting warmth. Reuben sat by her bed, quietly checking her steady breathing and the pink that had returned to her cheeks. She slept peacefully, her little hand still gripping his shirt as if afraid he might disappear. Across the room, Nakaana was trying to stand. Her massive frame trembled every time weight pressed down on her bruised legs, but her gaze remained fierce. She refused to let anyone see her weakness. Reuben instinctively rose and reached out to help, but she pulled back gently, keeping her distance. "You do not need to stand," Reuben said softly. Nakana glanced around the simple room, then looked at him. Her voice was low and hoarse. "We need to talk." Reuben pulled out a chair and sat across from her. The air between them felt tight. Nakana clenched her fists, the veins standing out on her thick forearms. She took a deep breath. "I know you think I said what I did last night because I was desperate. But I was not." Reuben pressed his lips together, saying nothing. She went on, "When Tala's fever hit, I thought I had lost my child. You held her. You kept her alive. You fought like a wolf guarding its pack. No one in my tribe ever did that for her." Her voice cracked. Then she began to tell him slowly, as if peeling back torn skin. Her husband, Hayuka, had been killed by a ruthless warrior from within their own tribe. That man was the younger brother of Kotokai. When Nakaana learned the truth and demanded justice, Kotokai, brother of the murderer, moved to silence her. They beat her, dragged her away in front of Tala. Wanhata, the tribe elder and her own father, chose silence out of fear the tribe would fracture. After that, they tied Nakaana and her daughter together and cast them out into the desert to die. Reuben listened, his hands tightening, heart burning. At last, Nakaana looked him straight in the eyes and spoke with unwavering resolve. "You asked why I chose you. Because I saw that you were not afraid to die for Tala, and an Apache child needs that to survive." Reuben took a deep breath. "I do not want to take advantage of you. I do not want to pressure you. I only did what was right." Nakaana nodded. "Then, we will do it your way." No pressure, no chains, just an agreement to survive. She held out her large hand to him. You protect Tala, protect me, and in return, I will do my part. Work, strength, and stand beside you when danger comes. Reuben looked at that hand, scarred, worn, strong, and placed his own in it. In that moment, an agreement was sealed. No ink, no vows, just two people of different blood, different pasts, bound by one purpose, to keep that little girl alive. Tala stirred in her sleep and whispered "Pa" in a dreamlike voice. Reuben turned and looked at her, a faint smile crossing his face. He did not know that in just a few days, this fragile agreement would be tested by the shadow of Kotokai, and by Nakana's entire tribe. That afternoon, the frontier sky was a dull gray, like an old blanket thrown over the world. Reuben was out in the yard splitting firewood, while Nakana was around back, using her massive hands to repair a broken section of the fence. Tala sat on the porch steps, holding the crude wooden doll Reuben had just whittled for her, humming a soft tune from an Apache lullaby her mother used to sing. Then came the sound of hooves breaking the silence. First one, then two, then four. Steady, unhurried, but full of intent. Reuben stopped mid-swing. A chill ran down his spine. He looked up and saw 4 figures emerging from the red dust. 3 Apache warriors and a 4th in front, tall, broad-shouldered, sitting on his horse like a man born to command. Kotokai. Even though they had never met, Reuben knew instantly. Tala sensed the danger first. She immediately ran toward her mother, clutching Nakana's leg. The giant woman froze, her hand tightening around a wooden beam so hard it creaked under the pressure. Go inside, Tala, Reuben said softly, without turning around. But Tala did not move. Nakana gently rested her hand on her daughter's head, as if anchoring her there, then stepped forward, slightly behind Reuben's shoulder. When the riders were about 20 paces from the house, Kotokai pulled the reins. His horse reared slightly, snorting foam. Kotokai glanced around the little homestead, the fence, the roof, the water barrels, as if appraising something far beneath his standards. Then his eyes landed on Nakana. You made me work to find you, sister-in-law, he said in broken but clear English. His voice was like a blade scraping stone. The tribe wants you back. You belong to us. Your child does too. Reuben felt Nakana tremble behind him, but her voice came steady and low. I do not belong to you. Not ever again. The 3 warriors behind Kotokai stiffened. Hands moved to tomahawks. Their eyes scanned Reuben with a mix of disdain and caution. To them, he was just a scrawny white farmer not worth a second thought. Reuben took one more step forward, standing fully in the doorway now, his rifle resting in his hands. He did not raise it, but the barrel angled ever so slightly toward Kotokai. His voice was quiet, but it carried in the stillness of the yard. She is a guest in my home, and the child, he nodded toward Tala, is my daughter. The air went still. One of the warriors let out a dry, mocking laugh. An Apache child, daughter of a pale twig like you. You must be dreaming. But Reuben said nothing. He just stared at Kotokai, unflinching. Tala, unable to understand all the grown-up words but hearing my daughter, walked over slowly and wrapped her arms around Reuben's leg. Her tiny hands clung to his pants, a natural reflex. That gesture, small and wordless, said more than any argument could. Kotake's eyes darkened. You are stealing the wife and child of an Apache, he growled. The tribe's law does not forgive that. Reuben tightened his grip on the rifle. His heart pounded like war drums, but his voice remained calm. I did not steal anyone. I saved 2 people from dying. If you wanted them back, you should have come 3 nights sooner. One of the warriors shifted, ready to charge, but Kotokai held up a hand. His voice turned colder as he spoke to Nakana. You think he can protect you? 1 man against a tribe? Nakana said nothing. She stepped half a pace closer, standing so her broad shoulders nearly eclipsed Reuben's entire body. Her silence was her answer. In that moment, perhaps for the first time in his life, Kotokai felt truly rejected by both a woman and a skinny white man. He pressed his lips together. His eyes flashed with rage. Fine, Kotokai said slowly. If he claims her as his daughter, then I will return. With others. And next time, there will be no talking." He yanked the reins. The 4 horses turned in the red dust and rode away with heavy hoofbeats. None of them looked back. Only the wind remained whistling through the fence, carrying the scent of dust and the warning of a coming storm. Tala looked up at Reuben. "Pa," she whispered. He placed his hand gently on her head, his eyes still fixed on the horizon where the riders had vanished. "I appreciate your being here. If this story reminded you of old days, dusty evenings, hoofbeats echoing in your heart, subscribe to my channel. So every day, we can sit down together, and I will tell you another story from the West." In the days following the confrontation with Kodakai, Reuben's little homestead fell into a fragile kind of peace, like a thin sheet of glass that could shatter with just a tap. But sometimes, even that kind of delicate peace is enough to make a man feel alive again. Tala recovered with surprising speed. She ran all over the yard, her tiny feet kicking up dust every time she chased the old hen hiding near the fence. Every time she tripped, she stood right back up, brushed off her dress, and beamed at Reuben like death had never come near her just days before. "Pa, look at this." Tala held up the wooden doll Reuben had whittled by hand, her eyes shining as she showed him a heart-shaped stone she had just found. Reuben laughed a sound he could not even remember the last time he had made. From behind the stable, Nakana bent down and lifted a long plank of wood nearly as tall as Reuben with just one hand. She placed it into the new fence and knocked it into place with 2 solid thuds. That strength, that sound, it was something Reuben would never admit out loud, but he felt safe having it around. Not because she was protecting him, but because she had chosen to be here. Even though her wounds still ached, Nakana kept working hard, cutting feed, patching the roof, fixing the stable door. Reuben tried more than once to stop her, but she would only give him a simple look and say, "I'm holding up my part of the deal." In the afternoons, they sat together on the porch. Reuben carved more toys for Tala. Nakana sat beside him, silent but not distant. The wind played through her long black hair, carrying the scent of wood smoke and warm dust into the glowing red sky of sunset. Tala crouched low, drawing circles in the dirt, then looked up and asked, "Pa, Mama, is this place home?" Reuben froze, while Nakana lowered her head slightly, her eyes suddenly soft like water. "Just for now," Reuben said quietly, trying to keep his voice steady. But Tala frowned, looking at him as if she did not quite understand. "And Nakana?" She looked at him a moment longer than she needed to. That night, while Reuben was fixing the stable door, he caught sight of Nakana standing on the porch, staring into the darkness. Her enormous frame stood bold under the moonlight, her broad shoulders filling the doorway. "Are you worried they'll come back?" Reuben asked. "No. I am certain they will," Nakana answered without hesitation. Then she turned to him. "You know I cannot run anymore. If they take me, there will be no one left to protect Tala." Reuben tightened the rope in his hand. "I will protect her." Nakana looked at him for a long time. The deep black in her eyes no longer held the guarded distance of those first days. Now there was trust, and something else, something gentler, harder to name. "I know," she said, her voice low, like the echo of a distant drum. "And that's the only thing that lets me sleep." Far off, in the night, the howl of a wolf stretched across the land. Nakana looked toward it, then spoke in a whisper, like a prophecy. "Peace will not last long, Reuben." And he knew she was right, because at any moment, not far from here, Kodakai could be gathering men, sharpening blades, and waiting for the blackest night to return. But this time, Reuben had chosen his side, and he would not back down. That morning, the air was strangely still. The crows were silent. The wind did not blow. Reuben was tying a bundle of hay when Nakana suddenly stopped, tilting her head ears sharp like the warrior born of mountain and forest she was. "Reuben." Her voice was low, taut like a bowstring. He heard it right after. Hoofbeats, steady, slow, but heavy, like a funeral drum. Not 3. Not 4. Many. Tala ran into the yard, but Nakana immediately stretched out one powerful arm, blocking her. Within minutes, 7 Apache warriors appeared beyond the fence. They did not shout. They did not raise weapons to the sky. They just stood, watching silently, but each gaze felt like a cold blade pressed to the throat. In the center of them was a man with silver, streaked ash-gray hair, shoulders draped in a reddish, brown deerskin cloak. Elder Wanhata, Nakana's father. His face was lined with deep wrinkles, but his eyes were sharp as spear points. There was no anger in them, only authority. "Nakana," he said in a deep, clear voice. "My daughter." Nakana did not bow her head. She stood tall, nearly a full head taller than her father, positioned firmly in front of Reuben and Tala. "Why have you come?" Her voice was steel. Wanhata tightened the reins, his eyes drifting over Reuben as if he were just a pebble on the road. "The tribe demands your return. You are the promised wife of Kodakai." "I am not his wife," Nakana answered, each word hitting the ground like a stone. A warrior behind Wanhata stepped forward, voice sharp. "You belong to us. You defy the laws of the tribe." "What law?" Nakana snapped, eyes blazing. "The law that protects the man who murdered my husband? The law that allowed his brother to beat me in front of my child?" The air thickened like fog. Wanhata closed his eyes and sighed. A few warriors exchanged glances. They clearly knew the truth, but none had ever spoken it aloud. Reuben rested his hand on the rifle but did not lift it. Instead, he stepped forward to stand beside Nakana, a quiet declaration. Wanhata saw it. "You," he said, pointing straight at Reuben, "have stolen my daughter and my grandchild from the tribe." "I did not steal anyone," Reuben replied. "When I found them, they were nearly dead." A warrior barked. "If she does not want to return, then why is she here? Why is she standing beside you?" Nakana did not hesitate. She stepped forward half a pace, unfastened part of her deerskin top, and revealed long, bruised scars, welts from whips, rope burns, bruises so deep the flesh had turned black. Tala cowered behind Reuben, trembling slightly. Nakana looked every man in the eye, then spoke. "This is why I will not go back. This is Kotokai's gift, and this is what the tribe expects me to forget." No one said another word. One warrior lowered his head. Another exhaled heavily, as if cursing himself for ever believing Kotokai. Only Wanhata remained unmoved, calm to a chilling degree. "Even so," he said coldly, "the tribe still needs you. You carry my blood. You are our strongest woman warrior." Nakana clenched her fists. Her voice was low and resolute. "I will not return. Not while the man who killed Hayuka walks free. Not while Kotokai roams the village without punishment." Wanhata remained silent for a long time. Reuben could feel Tala gripping his pant leg tighter, as if sensing something terrible was about to happen. At last, the elder lifted his head and declared, "Then we will take you back whether you agree or not." 6 warriors moved in unison, hands landing on their weapons. Nakana and Reuben stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder. In that moment, no one in the yard could see the line between Apache and white man anymore, only a mother, a man, and a child standing against a tribe ready to use force to reclaim what they believed was theirs. The war of words was over. The shadow of violence had truly fallen upon the homestead. The air on the homestead cracked like dry wood meeting flame. 6 Apache warriors stood in a half circle, hands resting on tomahawk handles and short bows slung across their backs. Elder Wanhata remained mounted on his horse, his gaze cold and heavy, as if every choice had already been made long before. Reuben knew one wrong move, one quick breath and blood would spill. Behind him, Tala began to cry softly, but Nakana placed her large hand gently on the girl's head, holding her still. Reuben could hear the trembling breath of the child, each sound a blade keeping him sharp in the eye of the storm. Wanhata spoke, his voice deep and cold like stone at the bottom of a lake. "Nakana, you have no right to defy the tribe. You have no right to choose this white man over your own blood." Nakana stepped forward, her shadow nearly blocking all the light ahead of Reuben. "I did not choose him over the tribe," she said, her voice like a war drum. "I chose the truth. I chose Tala." The warrior to the left growled, "Truth? Your husband died in battle." "No one did anything," Nakana growled back, her voice low and thunderous. "My husband was killed from behind, and the one who did it was Kotokai's brother, and every one of you knows it." Several gazes faltered. One warrior shivered, his eyes darting away. Wanhata closed his eyes, as if hearing an old song he did not wish to face again. The past should not be reopened. To protect the tribe's unity, you must return. Reuben stepped forward. For the first time, he stood between two laws, two worlds, and had to choose where he belonged. He spoke slowly, every word clear. She's not going back. The person you want to drag away is a mother. And that little girl, he pointed at Tala, has no one else but her and me. A warrior scoffed. You think you can protect them, white man? You, alone, against us? Reuben said nothing. He simply raised his rifle without shaking, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Nakana glanced at him. In her eyes, for the first time, there was something new. Respect. And maybe a hint of pride. One brash warrior stepped forward, drawing his tomahawk. But before he could move again, Reuben spoke, his voice sharp, like a blade honed through sleepless nights. If you want to take her, you'll have to step over my body. Tala let out a sob. Nakana clutched her daughter's hand tighter. Those words froze the entire yard. Wanhata stared at Reuben for a long time, so long that Reuben could hear his own heartbeat, and the warm breath of Tala behind him. At last, the elder spoke. You think you can change our laws? Reuben did not back down an inch. I'm not changing anything. I'm just protecting my home. The word home made Nakaana flinch just slightly, as if it touched something deep inside her. Something she had been trying to hold together ever since she was cast into the desert. Wanhata slowly raised a hand. A small gesture, but the 6 warriors stopped. Not a single one moved forward. The wind blew, carrying the dry whisper of dust, stretching the silence until it hurt to breathe. Then the elder spoke, heavily but clearly. If my daughter will not climb onto the horse herself, then I will not take her by force. Not in front of this child. He glanced at Tala for the first time. There was a flicker of softness in his eyes. But I will return. The law has not changed. He pulled the reins. The 7 warriors turned and rode away from the fence. But before they vanished into the distance, Wanhata looked back, his eyes locked on Reuben through the red dust, and said, Today, you win because I would not have a child see blood. But next time, you will need more than courage to survive. The horses galloped off, leaving the yard buried in a silence heavy as iron. Tala clung to Reuben's leg. Nakana looked at him for a long moment, then softly said, You've stepped onto a road with no way back. Reuben answered, voice low and firm, Then I'll walk it to the end for you and Tala. And for the first time, Nakana bowed her head to a man. The next morning, the sky was a pale yellow like sunlight cut in half. A cold wind swept through, signaling that something was coming. Reuben had been up since early. He lit the fire, checked the rifles, cleaned the stable, but really, he was just waiting, tense as a bowstring on the edge of snapping. Nakana stood on the porch, her massive frame still, eyes gazing far down the trail. Tala clung to her mother's leg, holding her small wooden doll, her tiny shadow stretching long beneath the 2 figures. Then came the sound of hooves, not heavy like yesterday's, not the rhythm of 7 warriors ready for violence. Today, the sound was slower, more solemn like footsteps in a ritual. Elder Wanhata had returned, this time with only 2 elder warriors. No bows, no spears. Reuben placed a hand on his rifle, but Nakaana touched his shoulder gently. They are not here to fight today, she said. The elder stopped exactly 10 paces away. He dismounted slowly, like a man carrying a weight heavier than his own body. Reuben. He spoke the name for the first time. Reuben did not answer. He simply stood tall, ready to face whatever came. Wanhata looked at Nakaana for a long time. There was no anger in his gaze now, no authority. Only the quiet weariness of a father seeing something he could no longer hold on to. My daughter, he said, voice soft but clear. I believed protecting the tribe mattered more than protecting the individuals within it. But yesterday, I saw where I was wrong. Nakaana took a deep breath, but said nothing. Wanhata turned his gaze to Tala, the little girl trying to hide behind Reuben's leg but still peeking out. This child, he said, has seen things no child ever should. I will not let her see more. Then he spoke words none of them had dared to hope for. From this day forward, Nakana is released from the tribe's marriage law. Reuben froze. His heart pounded. Nakana nearly buckled. No wound had ever weighed as much as the burden she had carried for months. Before anyone could respond, Wanhata continued, "And the child, Tala, belongs to whoever she chooses." Both Reuben and Nakana held their breath. Wanhata stepped closer, then knelt, speaking with a gentleness that surprised them all. "Tala, who do you choose? The tribe? Or this man?" Tala looked at her mother, then at Reuben. She gripped his hand tightly, her small voice steady as a knife-cutting stone. "Pa." One word, but it was enough to change everything. Wanhata closed his eyes and nodded. He turned to Reuben. "From now on, no warrior may harm you or the child. You will protect her as your own blood." Reuben nodded, holding Tala's hand tighter. Nakana stepped forward to face her father. They stood in silence for a long moment. At last, Wanhata spoke, nearly in a whisper. "I've lost a daughter who was once a warrior, but maybe I now see a mother, stronger than any warrior I have ever known." Nakana said nothing. She only bowed deeply before him, a gesture Reuben had never seen her make before. Then the elder climbed back onto his horse. Before riding off, he spoke one final time, casting his words into the wind like both a blessing and a warning. "Live in a way that honors the choice you made." The group disappeared over the hill. Tala ran into the middle of the yard, arms wide open, calling, "Home!" Nakana walked up beside Reuben. She placed her large, scarred hand on his cheek just like that first time. But now there was no desperation, only a true choice. "Yes," she said, her voice low and warm. "This is our home, and on that wild frontier, 3 people of different blood. My friend, out in that harsh borderland, it is not blood that makes a family but choice." Reuben, a poor farmer, stood tall between 2 worlds to protect a woman left behind and a child who had nearly lost everything. And Nakana, even after betrayal, found the courage to trust the kindness of a stranger. They did not find each other by fate, but by a shared refusal to walk into darkness. They chose light, and they chose each other. It has been an honor to share this story with you, dear listeners of Wild West Storytelling. Wherever you are, I wish you peace and happiness. I love you all. Let me know what you thought of this story. Drop a comment below. Press 1 if you enjoyed this tale. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel, so you will not miss the next dramatic tale from the Wild West. Jericho pulled on the reins, his eyes stopping when he noticed something, dangling between the wooden beams. He dismounted and walked slowly forward. Then his heart nearly stopped. 4 women were hanging upside down, their ankles tightly bound with thick ropes, their entire bodies swaying in the cold wind. The blood had rushed to their heads, turning their skin a deep purple. Their hair hung down, covering their faces, making them look like upside-down ghosts guarding the gate to his home. Right next to them, a wooden sign had been nailed straight into the gatepost. "Land already owned, Morrison." Jericho gripped the gun at his side, his breathing growing heavier. It felt like he had stepped into the devil's domain. But when he crouched down to check each one, his fingers touched flesh that was still warm, still faintly trembling. They were still alive. Alive in the most fragile, miraculous way, like candles on the verge of burning out. Without hesitation, Jericho pulled out his knife, cutting through each rope, catching each limp body as it dropped from the hooks. He squared his shoulders to carry the weight of 4 lives nearly snuffed out, and had no idea that this act of mercy would drag him into a war even more brutal than the one he had barely survived. Jericho Hale carried the first woman into the old wooden cabin. The door groaned as it opened, as if protesting the return of its rightful owner. The air was thick with the smell of mildew, ash, and rotting wood, but Jericho had no time to care. 4 half-dead bodies were still out there, and they needed him now. He laid the woman down on the wooden floor and quickly lit a fire in the hearth. As the blackened coals caught flame, a warm light spread through the room, pushing back the deadly chill in the air. Jericho returned to the gate and lifted the second woman. She felt almost weightless, just bones and skin, her body so ravaged it was barely holding on to life. He squared his shoulders and carried each woman into the cabin, as if lifting ghosts stripped of their dignity. By the time he reached the 4th, his arms were numb and his breath was short, but he did not stop. Once they were all laid out around the fire, he knelt beside them and began checking each one with the same hands that had once saved comrades on the battlefield. The first, her pulse was weak but steady. The second, red hair tangled like a flame just snuffed out. Her breath was shallow, her body stiff with pain. The third, her hands were ice cold, as if the smallest breeze could carry her away. And the last, her eyes shut tight, but between her arms was a leather crossbody bag. She was still clutching it, even after being strung up like that. Jericho noticed right away. She was holding something important. Something very important. He ran to get a basin of water, soaked a cloth, and gently wiped the rope marks from each bruised face. He massaged their arms and legs to get the blood flowing again. Hot tears slid down the cheeks of Eleanor the blonde when he slowly pulled her hands from their cramped position. "Hang in there. You are safe now," Jericho whispered, though he was not sure if this cabin was truly safe. The redhead twitched, then burst into a dry, hacking cough, dragging the last of her despair from deep inside. Her body shook uncontrollably. Jericho quickly raised a cup of warm water to her lips. As the warmth filled the cabin, the women began to stir, each at their own pace. The first eyes to open were Maribel's black hair, a stare sharp as a blade. She tried to sit up, but Jericho gently pressed a hand to her shoulder. "You are all right. My name is Jericho Hale. I found you at the gate." Maribel let out a rough breath, her voice hoarse. You should not be here, Morrison. He is going to come back." Jericho paused, his eyes narrowing as that old warrior instinct flared inside him. "I am not going anywhere," he said. "But right now, you need to stay alive." The others drifted in and out of consciousness, like their souls were struggling to return to the world. When the last one, Juniper, cracked her eyes open, still gripping the leather bag, she whispered something that froze the air in the room. "What is in here is what he fears most." Jericho looked at the worn leather bag. He did not know what was inside, but he understood one thing. Tonight, evil had shown its face, and he had unknowingly chosen to stand with the ones it hunted, and that choice would change everything. The fire in the hearth crackled softly, its gentle popping echoing through the room, casting flickering light on four faces that had just crossed the line between life and death. The bruises on their wrists and ankles were still raw, the smell of scorched rope clinging to their hair. Jericho sat down on a low wooden chair, his back against the cabin wall. No one spoke for several minutes. Pain and fear thickened the air like smoke, until Maribel, the black-haired woman, the natural leader of the group, finally broke the silence. She pushed herself upright, her cold, sharp gaze locking onto Jericho. "We were not robbed, and we were not kidnapped. We were executed." Jericho frowned. "Executed?" Rosalind, the redhead, let out a bitter, broken laugh, doubling over from the pain. "That is right. Morrison wanted us strung up like wolves caught raiding livestock. A message to the whole town. Defy him and die." Jericho felt heat rise in his temples. Judge Morrison, he had always been rumored to rule with a heavy hand, but what he was hearing now reeked of something more savage. A beast in a judge's robe. Grace, with deep brown hair, the oldest among them, spoke next, her voice calm but filled with restrained anger. He did not just steal land. He turned the law into a whip. Anyone who refused to bow, he would invent a debt they could never repay. Eleanor, the blonde, still curled beneath a blanket, added with a trembling voice, "My father, he was just late on his winter tax. Morrison quadrupled the amount. Then came the fees, then the interest, and then he took our home." She covered her face, sobbing. "He died the night we were thrown out. Morrison called it an accident, but we know the truth. He wants every poor woman to become his property." Rosalind clenched her fists, her voice sharp with fury. "We formed a group, a secret one. We started collecting fake debt records. We were investigating his trafficking ring. And," she turned to Juniper, "Morrison's wife did not disappear because she ran away." Juniper, who had been silent until now, opened the leather bag and placed its contents on the table. A stack of documents, copies of debt ledgers, lists of missing persons, and a sealed envelope. "This," Juniper said, her voice heavy with time, "is from Nora Beckett, the court clerk, the only one who still had a conscience." Maribel nodded. She knew everything. Morrison locked her up to silence her. Jericho stared at the sealed envelope. Morrison's name was stamped across every page. These documents, they could bury a judge. Juniper continued. Nora managed to escape, but she was badly wounded. She gave us her full testimony and asked us to get it to the federal government. Grace clasped her hands tightly together, and that very night, Morrison found us. Rosalind spat hard onto the floor. He did not kill us right away. He strung us up at your grandfather's gate, like he wanted to claim the land first, then kill us later. Jericho clenched his jaw. The cabin fell into a heavy silence. One thing was crystal clear. They were not just victims. They were holding the very thing that could burn Morrison's entire empire to the ground. And from the moment they opened their eyes, Jericho had been pulled straight into the heart of the storm. Outside, the mountain wind howled through the cracks in the door like the weeping of the ancient forest. Jericho's grandfather's old cabin stood in the thick darkness, a tiny wooden box on the verge of being swallowed whole. But inside, 4 women and Jericho were turning it into a fortress. Maribel slowly stood up, her legs still trembling after hours of hanging upside down, but her gaze was as sharp as ever. We do not have much time. Morrison will be back before sunrise. Rosalind the redhead slammed her hand down on the wooden table. I swear he will pay. Tonight. His blood will stain this land. Grace pulled Rosalind back into her seat, her voice soft but firm. This is not revenge, Rose. This is survival. If he comes, we survive. Juniper silently checked the leather bag again, treating it like a sacred relic. Jericho glanced over and asked, "Is there anything in the bag besides the documents?" Juniper replied, "There is something Nora Beckett gave us, and said only to use it if there was no way out." Jericho asked no further. He understood tonight was no longer just about survival. It was a battle between light and darkness. They got to work. Maribel propped up furniture tables, crates, even the storage cabinet to barricade the windows and front door. Rosalind grabbed kerosene and poured it into empty liquor bottles, wrapping them with cloth to make firebombs. Grace checked their ammunition, only 3 usable guns, along with Jericho's grandfather's hunting knife and old axe. Eleanor, though her hands were still trembling, gathered water, bandages, and ointment into a corner they turned into a makeshift infirmary. Jericho stood alone at the door, looking out into the vast darkness. Beneath the black sky, he could hear faint echoes from the war years. He had once fought for strangers, for distant orders. But this time, he was fighting for the people breathing right beside him. He turned back and said, "You could still escape. There is a trail over the ridge behind the mountain. I will hold him off." Maribel stepped up and looked him dead in the eye. "We have been running our whole lives, Jericho. This time, we stand." Rosalind lifted her chin. "And if Morrison comes, he will have to face all 5 of us." Jericho pressed his lips together. There was something burning in their eyes, something he had never seen on the battlefield. A will to live that burned brighter than fear. By midnight, the cabin was nearly ready. Firelight flickered across their faces, casting shadows on the wall like warriors out of legend. Eleanor looked at Jericho and asked softly, "Do you believe we will make it out of this alive?" Jericho rested his hand on his grandfather's old Winchester rifle. His voice was calm but steady. "I believe this. If Morrison sets foot on my grandfather's land, he will have to go through us first." Out there, deep in the wilderness, came the sound of hooves, distant but clear. 1, then 2, then more. Maribel gripped her gun tightly. "They are coming." Jericho took a deep breath. The storm was arriving sooner than he expected, and that night, his grandfather's cabin was about to become a battlefield. Thank you for being here with me. Let us know where in the world you are listening from. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel to support my work. I truly wish you peace and happiness, wherever in the world you are hearing this. The sky had not yet turned to day, but streaks of red from the coming dawn had already begun to cut faint lines across the cold gray horizon. Jericho stood by the window, eyes narrowed. A heavy sound rumbled from the distance, the pounding of hooves, not just one, but dozens. Maribel leaned in close to his shoulder, her voice barely more than a breath. "How many?" Jericho answered without blinking. "At least 30. Then they appeared, 30 of Morrison's gunmen, lined up across the hillside. The red light of dawn glinted off their rifles, each one shining like steel teeth. In the center, Riding a massive black horse as wild and fierce as the man himself, was Morrison. He wore an old judge's hat, but the face beneath it was pure predator. He tossed away a cigar, crushed it under his boot, and shouted, "Jericho Hale, I am giving you one last chance. Bring those 4 women out, or I will burn your grandfather's damn shack to the ground with them inside it." Rosalind let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Call it a cabin, you bastard. The only shack here is that rotting brain of yours." Jericho pulled her back before she exposed herself at the window. He shouted back, "This is my family's land, and no one steps through that door without leaving their blood in the dirt." Morrison curled his lip into a wicked grin. "Good. Let us see how tough that mouth is when your cabin turns into a coffin." He raised his hand. That was the signal. Gunfire erupted like thunder. Bullets tore into the wooden walls, blasting splinters across the room. Maribel and Grace rolled into their prepared positions, and Jericho's grandfather's old rifle cracked first. One of Morrison's gunmen took a round to the neck and dropped like a sack of grain. Rosalind rushed to the back door and hurled a Molotov cocktail. The flaming bottle smashed into the brush, lighting up a long wall of fire that cut off half of the enemy's right flank. Eleanor screamed as she struggled to reload with shaking hands, but she did not run. No one inside the cabin ran. Jericho dove to the opposite window, taking careful aim, each shot carrying the precision of a man who had lived in the trenches. A gunman darted toward a pine tree. Jericho dropped him before he could finish reloading. Outside, Morrison roared like a madman. "Idiots! Put out that fire and push forward. It is just one rotten cabin." But Jericho's grandfather's cabin was not rotten. It had become a death trap. One of the thugs charged the front door and kicked it with full force just as Juniper pulled a tripwire. A heavy plank spiked with nails swung down like a forest snare, striking the man square in the throat. He collapsed on the steps, blood spraying in arcs. Inside the cabin, harsh breaths blended with gunfire. Outside, fire, smoke, and the screams of the wounded echoed through the forest. Jericho gritted his teeth. "There are a lot of them," Maribel replied without lifting her eye from the scope. "And we are not easy to erase." The battle had begun, one tiny cabin against 30 cold-blooded killers. No one backed down, and Jericho knew if this cabin had once been his grandfather's home, then today it would become the grave for anyone foolish enough to cross its threshold. Thick smoke from the gunfire blanketed the front of the cabin like a black curtain drawn straight from hell. Cries of pain mixed with Morrison's barking orders echoed across the hillside. But inside that chaos, within the cabin walls, there was a strange stillness like time itself had slowed, giving them just one breath to catch. Jericho reloaded, sweat mixing with wood dust on his forehead. "They are not going to retreat," he said. "Morrison will never take a loss in front of his own men." Maribel exhaled sharply. "Then we make him understand he is fighting a battle he cannot win." Juniper stood, clutching the leather bag to her chest. Her eyes no longer trembled like when she first woke. Now they were like 2 thin blades, sharpened by the kind of resolve that would rather die than let the truth be buried. "It is time," she said softly. Jericho frowned. "Time for what?" Juniper opened the bag. Inside, along with fake debt records, lists of the missing, and land fraud files, was a large envelope sealed with wax. She placed it on the wooden table. "Nora Beckett's testimony." Rosalind's eyes widened. "Nora? She is alive?" "I thought." "No," Juniper interrupted, her voice thick with grief. "She is dead." Morrison silenced her by sending her to treatment, a place no one ever comes back from. She opened the envelope. Inside were pages of shaky handwriting, but each word was as clear and sharp as a blade. "If you are reading this, I am dead. And the man who killed me is Judge Lucas Morrison. I was his court clerk. I saw him falsify debts, hide crimes, and traffic women. He killed his own wife when she discovered the real ledgers. I know the truth, and he knows I know." Grace gripped the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles went white. "Dear God, this is the final blow." Maribel nodded and turned to Jericho. "You kept us alive tonight, not just with bullets, but with this." Jericho stared at the stack of papers in Juniper's hands. It was not just evidence, it was the final voice of a woman murdered for trying to bring justice. He spoke, his voice low and steady like the swing of an axe. Let him see it. Rosalind's eyes snapped wide. What? Show it to Morrison? Yes, Jericho replied. He needs to see that his empire is already rotting from the inside, and he cannot kill the truth with a gun. Jericho hurled the envelope through a bullet-torn gap in the window. It landed right at Morrison's feet. He had just been shouting to burn the cabin when he caught sight of his own name written in Nora's unmistakable handwriting. The woman he believed had taken all her secrets to the grave. Morrison went pale. He ripped the envelope open, his eyes darting over each line like sledgehammers were striking his chest. No, this is not possible, he muttered. Some of the gunmen near him caught glimpses of the pages. Their faces went pale. One soldier asked cautiously, Sir, is this true? Morrison screamed, Shut your mouth, but it was too late. Doubt, fear, and betrayal spread like wildfire. A few men stepped back. Some broke formation entirely. Juniper watched it unfold, whispering, Nora, you struck him right in the heart. Jericho stood and looked out through the cracked wood. Let him rot from the inside. We just need to hold a little longer. The cabin shook again as another wave of gunfire crashed into it. The truth had rattled Morrison, but there was still madness in him, more than enough to keep the violence burning. And Jericho knew the real storm had yet to come. Outside the cabin, the gunfire began to fade, not because Morrison ordered it to stop, but because panic had begun to spread through his ranks. Some of the men had read enough of the testimony to realize Morrison was no judge. He was no protector of the law. He was a beast in a robe of authority, willing to kill anyone who knew too much. One soldier turned to the man beside him, voice trembling. We've been following a man who killed his own wife? Another shook his head. I am not dying for him. Not today. Morrison saw the cracks forming his fury, now more rabid than a cornered wolf. He drew his gun and pointed it directly at the man who had spoken, screaming like a madman. Anyone who turns back, I'll shoot you myself. Several of his men lost heart and ran. Morrison fired. One dropped instantly, dead. Rosalind, watching through the window, gasped. Dear God, he's shooting his own men. Grace gripped the handle of her knife. A demon biting its own limbs. That's when it's weakest. Jericho understood instantly. He was losing control, and this was the moment to end the siege. Jericho unlatched the back door and signaled to Maribel. I'll draw their fire. When he turns, you back me up. Maribel frowned. Jericho, that's not a plan. That's suicide. He answered with a look of iron resolve. I've walked through hell before. Once more won't scare me. Before anyone could protest, Jericho burst out the back door. Bullets screamed past his ears, kicking up dirt and gravel. He dove behind a large boulder, raised his grandfather's Winchester, and fired. Boom! One of Morrison's gunmen dropped. Morrison spun and aimed at Jericho. Show yourself, you son of a... Jericho said nothing. He moved like a ghost among the pine trees, every shot deliberate, every step calculated. Each time Morrison tried to advance, gunfire rang out from the cabin, Maribel or Rosalind covering Jericho's every move. Juniper, crouched by the window, clutched the last envelope, Morrison's fake debt records. She shouted into the chaos. Lucas Morrison, we've got enough evidence to drag you to hell 3 times over. Morrison heard every word, roaring like a wounded beast. Lies. I am the law. Jericho stepped out from behind the boulder, rifle raised and steady. No. You're just a killer hiding behind the law. Morrison swung his gun toward Jericho. The entire forest held its breath. And then, Maribel fired from the window. The bullet hit Morrison in the shoulder, spinning him sideways and dropping him to the ground. He roared in rage. I will. But before he could finish, the sound of galloping hooves thundered from the east. A group of riders burst through the trees, black coats billowing, badges glinting in the rising light. Federal agents. Mounted federal marshals. One of them shouted, Lucas Morrison, you are under arrest for crimes including murder, human trafficking, and document forgery. The agents tackled him into the mud, cuffing him before he could utter another word. His smug face twisted into despair. Eleanor broke down in tears, not from fear, but because justice had finally arrived in the place where it had been stolen for far too long. Rosalind slammed her fist against the cabin's post. Finally, he's on his knees where he belongs. Jericho let out a breath, exhausted, but his eyes were still sharp. Just like when he first carried 4 women from the edge of death into this cabin, Morrison was dragged away, sinking into the mud like a rotting sack of garbage. No longer a judge, no longer a man of the law, just a shivering criminal pulled into the light. And as the federal convoy rode off, Jericho turned back to the cabin where 4 women stood, still trembling, but alive. It was not over, but for the first time in years, they knew they had won a battle, and it was the one that mattered most. The sun slowly rose over the mountains, its pale golden light spilling into the valley, like the land itself was finally allowed to breathe again after a night suffocated by violence and hatred. Jericho's grandfather's cabin still stood torn, riddled with bullet holes, scorched with gunpowder, but standing tall, just like the man who defended it. Jericho sat on the steps, his back against a wooden post. Sunlight brushed across his weary face. The long years of war, the memories he had buried deep, now felt lighter as he watched the 4 women step out of the cabin alive, upright, and free. Eleanor was the first to speak, her voice quiet but full of emotion. You saved us, Jericho." He shook his head with a faint smile. "No. We saved each other." Rosalind planted her hands on her hips, her red hair catching fire in the sunlight. "To be honest, I thought you were out of your damn mind running out there to face them alone." Maribel, arms folded behind her back, still held her sharp expression, but her eyes had softened. "And thanks to that madness, we're all still here." Juniper slowly approached Jericho, placing the old leather bag on the wooden table outside. "I'll turn everything over to the federal agents. But this place," she glanced around, "deserves a second chance." That morning, they began cleaning the cabin not to forget what happened, but to prove they no longer feared it. Rosalind yanked broken wood from the window frame, cursing Morrison under her breath as she worked. Maribel replaced the door, hammering each nail with surprising strength for someone so lean. Eleanor gathered hay and splinters, pausing now and then to wipe away tears not from sadness, but from relief. Juniper reset the table, placing the leather bag on the bookshelf Jericho's grandfather once used for storing maps. Jericho stepped into the yard and lifted the old wooden sign that once hung above the door. Yesterday, Morrison had nailed over it, "This land is claimed, Morrison." Today, Jericho carved a new line into the wood, "Home of the survivors." Grace, the quietest among them, read the words and placed a hand on Jericho's shoulder. "Your grandfather would be proud." Jericho looked down at his hands, the hands of a soldier, of a man who had just stood against evil, and then looked over at the 4 women laughing together behind the cabin. "Not just him," he said. "I am, too." That afternoon, as sunlight touched the newly repaired wood, the cabin looked different. No longer a place where death once hung from the beams. No more the sound of rope brushing wood. It had become a home imperfect, but real. Maribel lit the stove for their first meal. Rosalind cracked open a bottle of whiskey. Eleanor placed wildflowers in an old vase. Juniper rehung the curtain at the window. Jericho stood among them for the first time in years, no longer a man lost in a vast and violent world. Here, among 4 women who had fought to their very last breath, he found a family, not bound by blood, but by the very noose that once tried to end them, and instead tied them together. And in the deep red glow of the setting sun, Jericho's grandfather's cabin began a new life, just like the people living inside it. My friends, there are people in this world who, no matter how much violence, injustice, or darkness life throws their way, still choose to stand tall. They do not choose safety. They do not choose silence. And they never turn their backs on the pain of the powerless. They choose justice even knowing that the road is paved with scars. Because for them, what is right is not just a law, it is a promise written into their hearts. And it is people like that who keep this world from falling into eternal night. It has been an honor to share this story with you. I truly hope that wherever you are safe, and you are happy. I love you all, my dear listeners of Wild West Storytelling. Tell me what you felt while listening to this story. Leave a comment below. Type the number 8 if you enjoyed this story. And do not forget to subscribe for more thrilling tales from the Wild West. In the middle of a dusty red square, 3 Apache women hung upside down from a wooden beam. Their bodies covered in bruises, dried blood smeared across their skin. To the townspeople, they were no longer human, just spoils of war to be auctioned off to the highest bidder. Alia, though beaten so badly her shoulders turned purple, still held a fierce, icy stare, proud and defiant, as if her eyes could burn the jeering crowd below. Keta gritted her teeth and endured it all, her body so solid that the ropes seemed ready to snap under the sheer tension of her hidden strength. Mira, the youngest of the three, had cloudy eyes filled with fear and pain. Yet she kept breathing, holding on until fate made its choice for her. Sheriff Connolly stood below, cracking his whip against the wooden post just for fun, his voice rough and hollow. Took some sweat to catch these 3 Apache snakes. Who wants to buy? We sell in bulk. The men burst out laughing, shouting filthy remarks like stones thrown at the hanging bodies. None of them stopped to think that these Apache women once had families, had a tribe, had laughter and nights around blazing campfires. In that loud and rowdy crowd, one man stood still, a widowed rancher. He looked up at the women as if seeing himself in their place, broken, exhausted, but still unbowed. When the sheriff yelled, "Starting at $5, the whole square went quiet, waiting for the first bid. Then Isaac's voice cut through the silence, firm and clear. $10. No one laughed anymore. No one had expected a white man to spend money on 3 Apache women. For what purpose? No one knew, but Isaac knew exactly why. They were not merchandise. This was the moment that would change his life and theirs forever. As soon as they left the square, Isaac tightened the reins and urged the horse to move faster, away from the curious stares still watching. The wagon rocked and jolted, red dust rising every time the wheels crunched over the gravel road. The 3 Apache women lay on a bed of straw in the back. They were no longer hanging upside down, but their bodies still trembled from pain and exhaustion. The evening wind blew across the prairie, carrying the faint scent of scorched grass, but for them, the wind only burned deeper into their open wounds. Alia opened her eyes first. She tried to lift her head, but a sharp pain in her shoulder sent her whole body into a spasm. Even so, her gaze remained sharp as a blade. She studied Isaac, the man sitting up front, his back straight, his shoulders thin, but solid. He did not look like a slave trader. He did not reek of whiskey. His eyes held no hunger, only a heavy silence, like a man who had lost too much. Keta spat out a bit of dried blood and spoke in a faint Apache growl. "Alia, what does he want?" Alia did not answer. She did not know. Mira kept trembling, curling into herself as if trying to vanish from the world. Isaac heard the groans from behind and gripped the reins tighter. He did not turn around, afraid they would think he meant to control or intimidate them. After traveling about half a mile, he stopped at the edge of a dried-up stream far from the townsfolk, far from any hostile gaze. He climbed down and unlatched the back of the wagon. The 3 women flinched, their warrior instincts kicking in despite having no strength left to fight. Isaac raised both hands slowly, every movement careful, measured, so as not to frighten them further. "No one is going to hurt you anymore," he said in a low, gravelly voice worn down by dust, but so genuine that even the wind seemed to pause and listen. "I did not buy slaves." He pulled out a small knife. All 3 women tensed. Keta even tried to sit up despite her torn wounds. But Isaac only knelt down and began cutting the ropes, digging into their wrists. Deep bruises marked their sunburned skin. Alia stared at him, eyes wide with both disbelief and suspicion. "I just wanted you to be free," Isaac said. "That $10 was not to buy people. $10 was to reclaim your lives from those monsters." Alia let out a faint, bitter laugh, part mocking, part aching. "Freedom? On white man's land? We step away from here, and we get shot. Is that freedom?" Isaac stayed silent for a moment, then said the words that changed everything. "If you have nowhere else to go, my ranch has space. There is food. There is shelter. My daughter needs someone to help care for her. And He paused, breathing softly. "I need someone who knows what it means to hurt and still keep living." The wind stilled. Then Alia pushed herself up on one arm. Keta pulled Mira closer. The 3 of them exchanged a look, one heavy with meaning, but no words. Isaac took a step back. "Stay or go. It is your choice." Alia stared into his eyes, not like an enemy, but for the first time, like someone searching for truth. She spoke slowly. "We will come with you. Not because we trust you, but because for once, a white man did not treat us like animals." The three women rose, staggering, but proud, and together, they walked toward the man who had bought their freedom for $10. Isaac's wooden house sat tucked away in the middle of the vast prairie. When the wagon came to a stop, the three Apache women stood still. None of them stepped down right away. They stared at the small house, with its weathered roof, the leaning stable, and the dry well so different from their village land, but still a place without whips and ropes. Isaac opened the door and stepped aside, as if they were guests arriving for a visit, not women he had just rescued from torture. Inside, Lydia, a blonde-haired girl of about 8, clutched a handmade cloth doll. When she saw the strangers, she hid behind her father, her eyes wide like drops of fear. Caleb, 16 years old, stepped out from the kitchen doorway with an axe in hand. He said nothing, but his stare was sharp, the kind of look white people had given Apache for years of war, suspicion, hatred, and deadly caution. Isaac placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder, gentle but firm. "No one in this house is going to harm them. Understood?" Caleb pressed his lips tight. He did not agree. But he did not argue either. Silence was his only reply. Alia stepped inside first. Every step sent pain shooting through her shoulder. But she held her back straight. Kata followed, her eyes sweeping the room like a wounded animal ready to fight. Mira moved the slowest, clutching the torn edge of her dress to hide her trembling. The air inside the house felt thick, so silent it seemed even a single breath could spark a war. Isaac nodded toward the old pots on the stove. "I have some bean soup. Not much flavor, but it will fill you." Alia glanced at Keta. Keta nodded. The three of them sat at the table but did not touch the spoons. Their hands rested on their laps, just inches from open wounds. Lydia, curiosity edging out fear, crept forward. She held out a small piece of bread to Mira, a simple gesture, but in that moment, it felt like the first crack in a wall built from years of hate. Mira accepted it, her eyes wet and shaking. It had been so long since someone offered her food with clean hands. Caleb scoffed. "So what, we feed them now? Just wait until one night they slit our throats?" The words made Keta leap to her feet, the chair crashing behind her, her fist clenched by instinct, ready to strike. Alia reached out and stopped her. Shaking her head, she would not allow blood to be spilled in the house they had just entered. Isaac turned and looked Caleb straight in the eyes, not with anger, but with a strength that made clear where the line had been drawn. "They are here, and from today on, they are part of this household." The room fell silent. That first night passed quietly, with nothing but the sound of breathing and the wind whistling beyond the door. Alia, Keta, and Mira lay near the stove. None of them slept deeply. Every creak and whisper made them bolt upright in fear. But even with the fear, even with the scars, for the first time in many months of pain, no one beat them. No one hung them upside down. No one tried to sell them. They had stepped into a home, not yet a family, but maybe, just maybe, it could become one. The first days at the Rowan Ranch passed as heavy as the gray sky over the frontier. No one spoke more than a few words to each other. Alia, Keta, and Mira lived in constant alert, while Caleb kept his distance like even one step closer might set everything off. But life on the frontier did not allow anyone to just sit and breathe. Work demanded hands, and it was that rough, necessary labor that became the first bridge between two worlds. That morning, Isaac assigned the task of fetching water from the well to Caleb and Keta. The well was halfway dry, requiring deep scooping and a rusty pulley system. Caleb frowned. He did not like being paired with an Apache, but Isaac gave him a long, quiet look. Caleb sighed and grabbed the bucket, walking ahead. Keta followed in silence. At the well, Caleb tugged at the rope, but the dry pulley groaned with every turn, a sound like metal crying out. Caleb gritted his teeth, pulling with both arms, but the water only crept up by inches. Keta stepped forward without a word. The boy shot her a glare. "Don't." But she had already taken the rope. With a single, powerful pull, the heavy line rose like it weighed nothing. Caleb stood frozen, not because of her strength, but because she did it without looking down on him. She helped simply because she knew how. "Pretty strong," Caleb muttered. though he tried to hide the truth in his voice. Keta smirked, not quite a smile, but for the first time. Her face was no longer carved from stone. Inside the house, Alia was showing Lydia how to thread dry seeds into a bracelet. Lydia's tiny fingers followed Alia's guidance carefully, her eyes lighting up with joy every time a bead landed in the right place. "It's so pretty," Lydia beamed. Alia paused for a second. That simple praise brought back memories of the women in her tribe, who once taught her the same way. It was a warmth mixed with a sting. But when Lydia wrapped her little arms around Alia's wrist to show off the bracelet, Alia laughed. Her first laugh since the day she was captured. From the kitchen doorway, Isaac watched with a soft smile, rare and full of quiet gratitude. In the backyard, Mira was helping Isaac gather firewood. Her hands were small, but she worked diligently and with care. Each time a loud noise startled her, she flinched. Isaac said nothing. He simply moved the pile of wood closer so she would not have to bend too far. A small gesture, but enough for Mira to feel that this was not a place where whips cracked. One evening, they sat around the fire. No one spoke much, just the soft crackling of burning wood. Suddenly, Alia began to sing an old Apache lullaby, low and full of sorrow. Lydia leaned her head against her shoulder. Mira swayed gently to the rhythm. Keta closed her eyes, tilting her head slightly to soak in the warmth of the fire and this strange new feeling of safety. Caleb looked around. He said nothing, but his eyes had changed. For the first time since Isaac's wife passed away, there was music in the house. And in the quiet of the prairie, something unnamed was beginning to grow, harmony and hope. Thank you so much for being here with me. Let us know where you're listening from. And if this story has touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel to support me. All I truly wish is for you to be safe and happy wherever you are listening to this story. That morning, soft golden sunlight streamed through the old wooden slats. Lydia's cheerful giggles echoed in the yard. Isaac's hammer struck rhythmically as he fixed the barn door. Alia and Mira were hanging clothes to dry. Keta was helping Caleb split firewood. No one knew that this fragile piece was about to be torn apart. From the distance came the sound of hooves, 4, then 6 horses, men's loud, rowdy laughter. Caleb turned his head, and the color drained from his face. "Sheriff," he whispered. Alia instantly laid her hand on the small knife Isaac had given her for protection. Mira began to tremble. Keta took a step forward. Her warrior instincts nearly fully awakened. The barn door swung open. Isaac stepped out and saw the riders approaching like a storm. Sheriff Connolly led the group, followed by 3 townsmen built like bulls, their faces flushed with alcohol. "Rowan," the sheriff barked, his voice thick with the authority of a man used to pushing others around. "We came back to collect the property you bought at the auction." Alia stood beside Isaac. When the sheriff saw her, he sneered. "You think $10 bought you the right to keep 3 Apache devils? Wrong. That sale was just me clearing out the trash. Now, I am here to take it back." Isaac stood tall. He did not shout, but his voice was clear enough to make both Keta and Caleb instinctively rise to stand beside him. "I did not buy slaves," Isaac said. "I bought their freedom." And the moment the ropes came off, they stopped belonging to anyone. One of the townsmen spat on the ground. "Apaches do not have a right to freedom." Keta stepped forward by half a stride. The man flinched. Her stare alone could make iron bend. The sheriff tried to regain control. "Rowan, I do not want trouble, but the town is whispering. They say you are harboring tribal murderers. So, either hand over these 3 women, or..." Alia lifted her chin, her eyes sharp as a blade. "Or what?" The sheriff jutted out his chin. "Or I will burn this place to the ground." That was when Caleb stepped fully beside Alia. The same boy who once hated them now gripped the handle of his axe, ready. Lydia ran out and clung to Isaac's leg, scared, but standing her ground. It was a sight that made the whole group of horsemen hesitate. A white man, a teenage boy, a little girl, 3 Apache women, standing together, not divided by race, not by blood, just one home worth defending. The sheriff looked at them, then at the fire in their eyes. He clenched his jaw. "Fine, Rowan. But I am warning you, this is not over." "Then let it end here," Isaac replied. The sheriff turned his horse. The other 3 men cursed under their breath, but followed. The group disappeared into the red dust. Isaac exhaled deeply. Alia slowly lowered her knife. Caleb let go of the axe, his shoulders trembling from the adrenaline. No one said a word, but they all understood. Today, they had fought as a family. After the encounter with the sheriff, everything at the Rowan Ranch shifted, not with noise, but with a quiet bond, solid like oak roots clinging deep into hard ground. No one said it aloud, but everyone knew. Ever since they stood in that line together in the yard, their fates had woven together like ropes too tightly knotted to ever come undone. Mornings grew busier, but they also began to feel warmer. Caleb no longer avoided Keta. Now, they worked together as a team, the hot-headed white teenager and the quiet Apache warrior, so different, yet oddly fitting together. One morning, when they needed to move a heavy rock from the garden, Caleb struggled with the crowbar, barely making it budge. Keta walked up, said nothing, just placed her hand at the end of the bar to brace with him. "Go slow. Follow my count," she said. Caleb nodded. 1, 2, 3. The rock popped out of the hole. Caleb's eyes widened. "You're really strong," Keta simply replied. "You are not bad yourself." It was the first time Caleb smiled comfortably in front of her. Inside the house, Mira no longer flinched at loud noises. Lydia often took her by the hand and led her outside, showing her all the small wonders only a child could find magical. A golden butterfly, a tiny bird's nest, even the skinny old cat from the ranch despite its constant grumpiness. One afternoon, Lydia brought Mira to the hilltop, where clusters of violet wildflowers grew. Mira, once too afraid to even lift her head, now stood in the field, her dress swaying in the wind, wearing a soft smile so faint only the observant would notice. But Isaac saw it, and he knew the girl was slowly becoming a person again. Not just a shadow beaten down by the past. Alia had become Isaac's right hand in almost everything. She had grown up around horses in her tribe, could read the wind, and even listen to the ground to sense coming rain. Isaac often stood beside her in the barn, the soft light of early morning making their faces feel closer than usual. "You fixed the saddle wrong," Alia said, her voice low but gentle. Isaac chuckled. "I have been fixing things wrong ever since my wife passed." They stood in silence for a moment. Alia looked at him, a long, searching look, as if she could see every unspoken wound he carried. In the evenings, during dinner, Alia sat across from Isaac. They did not speak much, but sometimes, just a glance between them was enough to say that both were slowly piecing their hearts back together. By the weekend, the little family had built part of a new fence, added another garden bed, and cleaned out the old barn. No one had expected 3 Apache women to work so skillfully, so harmoniously. But the truth was, they torn from their own tribe were now finding a new one, right in the place they had once feared most, a white man's home. When night fell, they all gathered around the fire. Isaac told stories about his late wife, a gentle woman who loved flowers and quiet things. Alia listened, her eyes softening. Mira leaned on Lydia's shoulder. Keta and Caleb argued playfully over who had chopped more wood. No one had to say it, but it was clear. These were no longer just 3 women rescued from the edge. This was a family, a strange family, a bold family, but so real that even the night wind seemed to slow down just to listen. Peace at the Rowan Ranch did not last long. Rumors about the white family sheltering 3 Apache women spread across Redemption Creek faster than desert wind. And once those whispers reached the ears of bloodthirsty men, something terrible was bound to happen. That afternoon, as the sunset burned its final streak of red along the hills, Caleb was teaching Mira how to shoot a bow when the thunder of hooves echoed through the land. He turned, his face pale. "Father, they are coming again." Alia instantly pulled Lydia inside. Keta grabbed the axe so swiftly that Caleb barely had time to react. Isaac stepped onto the porch, his eyes darkening. He had known this day might come, but he had not expected them to return with twice the numbers. Sheriff Connolly led the mob, followed by 7 or 8 armed men, rifles, nooses, wooden clubs. Their faces were flushed like roasted veal, reeking of whiskey and rage. "Rowan!" the sheriff roared. This time, We are not here to talk. Hand over those 3 women, now. Alia stepped onto the porch. Keta stood right beside her, shoulders drawn tight like a bowstring. Mira was behind them, but her gaze no longer trembled like it had in the beginning. Instead, it carried a new, quiet steel. Isaac said nothing. He stood between them like a pillar, the only thing keeping the storm from crashing through. The sheriff cracked his whip on the ground. Rowan, do not be a fool. The town is scared the Apaches will rise up. You keep those 3, you are turning your back on your own kind. Isaac stepped down the porch, calm but sharp as iron. What exactly am I betraying? Whom have I betrayed? I am choosing to protect innocent people. If that troubles you, the problem lies with you. One drunken man behind the sheriff stepped forward and spat at Isaac's feet. Why can't you understand? They are savages. We are here to reclaim town property. Alia's lips curled. Property? That word cracked like a stone through glass. She walked forward, the wind blowing her long black hair behind her. If it is war you want, we are not running. Keta rested her hand on the axe handle. Caleb raised the pistol Isaac had given him. Mira stood in the doorway, one hand wrapped around Lydia's shoulder, but her gaze was locked on the mob ahead. The family stood in a line not divided by white or Apache. There were only 2 sides now. Those who came to destroy this home, and those ready to die to defend it. The sheriff saw them, and his face changed. He had not expected the Rowans to stand so firmly. And none of the drunken men wanted to be the first to face 3 Apache warriors, a hardened man, a fire-eyed teenager, and a child who would not let go of her sister's hand. The air stretched tight as a drawn string. A crow flew overhead, its raspy cry splitting the silence. The sheriff clenched his jaw, then jerked his head. Pulled back. But, you want to die? Stay. The sheriff snapped, and so they did retreat. Into the red dust, into their fury, into a shame none of them dared name. As the hoofbeats faded, Isaac's shoulders relaxed. Alia let out a slow breath. Keta lowered her axe. Caleb grinned like he had just won a war. Lydia clung to Mira's leg, and Mira for the first time stood tall without trembling. No one spoke aloud, but they all understood. Today, they had not just defended the ranch. They had defended their new family. Summer drifted by slowly, as if the vast prairie itself wanted to offer a quiet pause for those who had endured too much loss. Since the standoff with the sheriff, no one dared come near the Rowan ranch again. People might whisper behind their backs, point from a distance, but no one stepped forward to break the home that 5 people, once strangers, once enemies, had built with courage and compassion. For the first time in years, the cornfields gave a good harvest. The horse barn had been repaired, and the new fence stood straight and proud. In every wooden beam, in every row of soil, the fingerprints of each person remained. Alia's care, Keta's strength, Mira's gentleness, Caleb's fire, Lydia's joy, and Isaac, the quiet force who held them all together. Each night brought laughter around the dinner table. Mira no longer flinched when a spoon hit the floor. Keta and Caleb now raced each other to hunt mountain goats like 2 mischievous kids. Lydia wore the bracelet Alia had made her every single day, proudly showing it to anyone she met. And Alia stood closer to Isaac now, whenever they worked side by side. No more distance. No more fragile barriers of fear or hatred. One evening, under the hush of the wind, Alia sat with Isaac on the front porch. They gazed across the darkening prairie under the moonlight. Neither spoke, but their silence was the kind shared by 2 souls who understood each other without a single word. I never thought I would feel this again, Isaac whispered. Alia tilted her head. Feel what? That I am no longer alone. Alia looked down at her hands, hands that had once been bound, beaten, and hung before a hateful crowd. Now, those same hands rested beside Isaac's, just inches apart. And for the first time, she wanted to close that distance. One late afternoon, as the prairie glowed gold beneath the setting sun, Isaac called Alia outside. He stood in the middle of the field, the wind tugging gently at his now graying hair. Alia walked toward him, her heart beating with the breeze. Keta and Caleb peeked from a distance, and Lydia clutched Mira's hand, whispering, Papa is about to say something big. Isaac knelt. Alia froze, not because she did not expect it, but because the moment was more beautiful than anything she had ever allowed herself to dream. Isaac pulled out a rough silver ring, its edges imperfect, yet it caught the golden light like a tiny flame. Alia, you brought laughter back to Lydia, strength to Caleb, a home for Mira, and life back to me. He took a deep breath, voice shaking but steady. Will you be my wife? The wind held still. Even the prairie seemed to listen. Alia stepped forward. She placed her hand gently on Isaac's cheek, a motion so tender it surprised even her. If only you knew. I chose long ago. She held out her hand, and Isaac slipped the ring on. A family once tied together by pain and fear now stood united beneath the golden sky. Alia Keta Mira Caleb Lydia and Isaac. No more lines between white and Apache. No more loneliness that stretched for 10 years. Only one thing remained simple, but powerful on this unforgiving land. Love and kindness may begin with just $10, but it takes a whole heart to keep them alive. My friend, there are people who appear in our lives like a small flame in the darkest night, quiet, unassuming, but warm enough to save an entire soul. They are the ones who reach out when others turn away, who give even when they have little. Their kindness is not for reward, but to remind the world that humanity still has a place. And it is those quiet souls who are the reason this world has never lost all hope. Above all else, I truly hope that you will always be safe and happy. I love each and every one of you, the dear listeners of Wild West Storytelling. Let me know what you felt about this story. Leave a comment below. Type the number 1 if you enjoyed this story. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more thrilling tales.